Robert Harrison was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the deep exhaustion that comes from years of chasing success and finally catching it, only to realize it doesn't fill the emptiness inside. He was 60 years old now, and by every measure the world used to judge success, he had made it. 3 luxury hotels, 2 office buildings in the heart of downtown, and a real estate portfolio worth more than most people could earn in 10 lifetimes. His penthouse apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city, like he was standing above everything and everyone. But standing above everyone also meant standing alone. It was a cold December evening, and Robert had just left another business meeting. This one had been particularly ugly. He'd spent 2 hours in a conference room, finalizing the purchase of an old rec center on Maple Street. The place had been there for 40 years, serving the neighborhood kids with basketball courts, art classes, and after-school programs. But the building was old, the neighborhood was changing, and Robert saw an opportunity. He planned to tear it down and build luxury apartments. Good business sense, he told himself. The protesters outside hadn't seen it that way. They'd lined up with signs, shouting about community and heritage and heartless developers. One woman, probably in her 70s, had looked him straight in the eye and said, "You might own buildings, Mr. Harrison, but you've forgotten what it means to build a home." Her words had stung more than he wanted to admit. Now, walking through the Christmas market that had taken over downtown for the holidays, Robert tried to shake off the feeling. The market was always packed this time of year. Wooden stalls selling handmade crafts, the smell of roasted chestnuts and hot chocolate. String lights hanging overhead like captured stars. Families everywhere laughing and shopping, their breath visible in the freezing air. Robert kept his head down and his expensive wool coat buttoned up tight. He didn't come here to enjoy the festivities. His assistant had asked him to pick up a corporate gift for an important client, something handmade and thoughtful to show he cared. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was paying someone to pick out a gift to fake sincerity. As he walked past a stall selling wooden toys, someone small crashed into his legs. Robert stumbled, catching himself before he fell. He looked down, ready to snap at whoever wasn't watching where they were going. A little girl stared up at him. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her jacket was too thin for the weather, and he could see it had been patched in several places with different colored fabric. Her sneakers were held together with silver tape around the soles, but what caught him off guard was her face. Despite the cold, despite her worn-out clothes, she was smiling at him. Not a nervous smile or an apologetic one, a real genuine smile like she was happy to see him. "I'm really sorry, sir," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I wasn't looking where I was going." Robert's irritation faded. He wasn't used to genuine apologies. Most people either feared him or wanted something from him. "It's fine. Just be more careful." He started to walk away, but the girl spoke again. "Wait, please. Are you Mr. Harrison? The businessman?" He stopped and turned back. This was usually where it started. Someone had sent their kid to tug at his heartstrings, to ask for money or help with some sob story. He'd seen it all before. "Who's asking?" "My name is Lily," the girl said, stepping closer. Her hands were shoved deep in her jacket pockets, and he could see she was shivering. "My teacher told our class about you. She said you're really successful and that you sometimes help people." Here it comes, Robert thought. The pitch, the request. Everyone wanted something. "Your teacher said that, did she?" Lily nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. And I've been coming here every day after school for a week hoping I'd find you. Mrs. Peterson said you sometimes walk through the market." Robert felt his jaw tighten. So this wasn't a random encounter. This child had been looking for him. Someone had put her up to this. "Where are your parents, Lily? Shouldn't you be home?" For the first time, the brightness in her eyes dimmed a little. "My dad is working. He's always working now. And my mom—" She paused, swallowing hard. "My mom is in the hospital. She's been there for almost a month." Despite himself, Robert felt a twinge of sympathy. He pushed it down. Sympathy in business was weakness, and sympathy with strangers was how you got taken advantage of. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't see what that has to do with me." "I wanted to ask you something important," Lily said, her voice growing quieter. "It's about my mom. She needs help." There it was. Robert reached for his wallet, the familiar routine playing out like it had 100 times before. Write a check, hand it over, feel briefly better about yourself, then move on. How much do you need? For medical bills? But Lily shook her head, and her response made him freeze with his wallet halfway out of his pocket. No, sir. I don't want money, Robert stared at her. In all his years of wealth, all the charity galas, all the fundraisers, all the people who'd approached him with requests, not once had anyone said they didn't want money. Then what do you want? Lily looked down at her taped-up sneakers, then back up at him. Her eyes were bright again, but this time he could see they were wet with tears she was trying to hold back. I want you to hug my mom. Robert was sure he'd misheard. The noise of the market, the Christmas music playing from nearby speakers, the crowd of people, it must have distorted her words. You want me to what? I want you to give my mom a hug, Lily repeated, speaking slowly and clearly. Just one hug. That's all I'm asking for. Robert looked around, certain this was some kind of setup. Was there a camera crew nearby? Was this for some television show about testing people's kindness? But he saw nothing unusual, just ordinary people shopping and enjoying their evening. Kid, I don't know what you think I can do, but hugging your mother isn't going to help with any medical condition. I know that, Lily said quickly. The doctors are taking care of her body, but nobody's taking care of her heart. Not the heart that pumps blood, she added, as if sensing his confusion. The heart that feels things. Robert had handled complex business negotiations, aggressive board meetings, and hostile takeovers. But standing there in the Christmas market, facing a small girl with taped shoes and an impossible request, he found himself completely out of his depth. Lily, I think you should go home. It's cold and your father is probably worried. Please, Lily said. And now the tears did fall, leaving tracks down her cold, reddened cheeks. Please just listen to me. Then if you say no, I promise I won't bother you again. Something in her voice made him pause. Maybe it was the desperation. Maybe it was the fact that she was clearly freezing, but had spent a week searching for him anyway. Or maybe it was that look in her eyes, the one that seemed to see past his expensive coat and his reputation and his walls, straight down to the lonely man underneath. Against every instinct that told him to walk away, Robert heard himself say, 5 minutes. Then I have somewhere to be. Lily's face lit up like someone had turned on a light inside her. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, thank you so much. As she began to speak, telling him about her mother and why a hug from a stranger might matter more than money ever could, Robert felt something shift in his chest. It was unfamiliar and uncomfortable, like a door that had been locked for years was beginning to creak open. He didn't know it yet, but this conversation was about to change everything. Robert looked at his watch, a clear signal that his patience had limits. But Lily didn't seem to notice, or maybe she just chose to ignore it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something carefully, like it was made of gold. It was a photograph, creased and worn from being handled too many times. She held it out to him with both hands. Robert took it, tilting it toward the light from a nearby stall. The picture showed a woman, probably in her early 30s, with warm brown eyes and laugh lines at the corners. She was hugging Lily, who looked a bit younger in the photo, maybe 5 or 6. Both of them were laughing at something outside the frame. The woman's arms were wrapped completely around the little girl, and you could see in their faces how much they loved each other. That's my mom, Lily said softly. That was taken 2 years ago at the park. Before everything changed. Robert handed the photo back, but Lily shook her head. Keep looking at it, please. I want you to see her the way she really is, not the way she looks now. What happened to her? Robert asked, despite himself. He told himself he was just being polite, letting the child say her piece before he left. But something about the photograph had caught him. The joy in it felt like something from another world. She got sick last year, Lily explained. At first, the doctors thought it was just stress, or maybe she needed to rest more. But it kept getting worse. She'd get tired really easy, and sometimes her heart would beat too fast or too slow. They did a bunch of tests and found out she has something wrong with her heart, a condition that makes it weak. Lily wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. Robert noticed and felt a pang of guilt. He was wearing a coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and this child was shivering in a thin jacket. They can fix it with surgery, Lily continued, but it's dangerous, really dangerous. The doctors told my dad that there's a chance she might not wake up after. They're going to do it next month, right after Christmas. Robert had been to enough hospitals, signed enough insurance papers for his employees to know that when doctors admitted something was risky, It usually meant the odds weren't good. "I'm sorry, Lily. That must be very scary for you." "It is," she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "But I'm more worried about my mom. She's scared too, but she tries to hide it. When we visit her, she smiles and tells jokes and pretends everything is fine. But I can see it in her eyes, she's terrified." "That's natural," Robert said, softer than he intended. "Anyone would be afraid." "But my mom was never afraid of anything," Lily said, and now her tears were flowing freely. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, but they kept coming. "Before she got sick, she was the bravest person I knew. When I was scared of the dark, she'd sit with me and tell me that darkness was just light taking a rest. When I didn't want to go to a new school, she held my hand and said we'd face it together. She made everything feel safe." Robert felt that uncomfortable tightness in his chest again, the one he'd been feeling more often lately. He cleared his throat. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is," Lily said firmly. "And that's why I need your help. Not money help. We have insurance and my dad works really hard. It's not enough for everything, but we'll figure it out. What we can't figure out is how to make my mom feel brave again." Robert shifted his weight, glancing around the market. People were walking past, caught up in their own worlds. Nobody was paying attention to a well-dressed businessman talking to a young girl by a toy stall. "Lily, I understand you're worried about your mother, but I don't see how a hug from a complete stranger would help. Wouldn't she rather have her family there? Her friends?" "We're there every day," Lily said. "My dad visits her every morning before work and every evening after. I go with him in the evenings and on weekends. Our neighbors visit too, and some people from the church. But it's not the same anymore." "What do you mean?" Lily looked down at the photograph still in her hands. "When my dad hugs her, his hands shake. I can see him trying not to cry. When I hug her, she holds on so tight, like she's afraid to let go. When our neighbors visit, they talk in quiet voices like they're already at a funeral. Everyone treats her like she's already gone, like they're saying goodbye." Robert felt something twist in his stomach. He knew that feeling. He'd felt it 20 years ago when his father was dying. Every conversation had felt like a last conversation. Every hug had felt like a final hug. It had been suffocating. "My mom told me something a few weeks ago," Lily continued. "She said the worst part isn't the pain or the fear of surgery. The worst part is feeling like she's already a ghost. Like everyone around her has already started mourning her and she's still here, still alive, still fighting." "That's heartbreaking," Robert said quietly. And he meant it. "That's why I thought of you," Lily said, looking up at him with those impossibly hopeful eyes. "Last month my mom saw you on the news. There was a story about your new hotel opening downtown. You were cutting the ribbon and the reporter asked you about how you built your business from nothing. Do you remember what you said?" Robert had given so many interviews, attended so many ribbon cuttings, they all blurred together. "I'm afraid I don't." "You said that the secret to success was refusing to accept failure," Lily recited, like she'd memorized it. "You said that when everyone told you something was impossible, you just worked harder to prove them wrong. You said you never gave up, even when things looked hopeless." Robert did remember that interview now. It had been one of his more honest moments, before his PR team had polished his image into something more palatable. "That's true, I did say that. My mom was watching that interview in her hospital bed," Lily said. "And when it was over, she started crying, but not sad crying, happy crying. She told me that you reminded her of her father, my grandpa. He died when I was a baby, so I never knew him. But my mom said he had the same look in his eyes that you had, the look of someone who never stops fighting." Robert didn't know what to say. He'd been called many things in his life: ruthless, brilliant, cold, successful, but no one had ever said he reminded them of someone they loved. "She said watching you made her remember what it felt like to believe in herself," Lily went on. "She said if someone like you could build an empire from nothing, maybe she could fight this disease. Maybe she could survive." "Your mother is very kind," Robert managed. "But Lily, I'm just a businessman. I'm not a doctor or a therapist. I can't give your mother courage." "You don't have to give her courage," Lily said. She already has it inside her. She just needs someone to remind her it's there. And it can't be someone who's scared of losing her. It has to be someone strong. Someone who doesn't know her well enough to mourn her. Someone who can hug her like she's already won the fight, not like she's already lost. Robert looked at this small girl with her patched jacket and taped shoes, and he realized she understood human psychology better than most adults he knew. She was asking for something that seemed simple but was actually incredibly profound. She wanted him to give her mother something that money couldn't buy, the feeling of being seen as a survivor instead of a victim. "Lily," he said slowly, "even if I agreed to this, which I haven't, why would your mother want a hug from me? A stranger walking into her hospital room? Wouldn't that be uncomfortable? Maybe even frightening?" "I thought of that," Lily said, reaching into her other pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote her a letter. I told her about you, about how you reminded her of Grandpa, about how I was going to try to find you. I asked her if she'd be okay with meeting you. She wrote back." Lily unfolded the paper and showed it to Robert. The handwriting was shaky but readable. "My sweet Lily, if you somehow find this man and if he's kind enough to visit a sick stranger, then yes, I would be honored to meet him. But baby, don't get your hopes up too high. Important people have important things to do. Love you forever, Mom." Robert read the note twice. The words were kind, but he could read between the lines. This woman expected to be disappointed. She expected her daughter's hope to be crushed by reality. She expected him to say no, and why wouldn't she? He'd spent decades saying no to people, no to community centers that didn't make financial sense, no to employees who needed flexibility over profit, no to his own daughter when she'd asked him to slow down and spend time with her, before she'd given up asking and stopped calling altogether. Robert handed the paper back to Lily. The logical part of his brain was screaming at him to walk away. This wasn't his problem. He had a dinner meeting to get to. He had contracts to review. He had a life that didn't include visiting hospitals and hugging dying women he'd never met. But standing there in the cold, looking at a child who'd spent a week searching for him, who'd asked for nothing except human connection, Robert felt something shift. Maybe it was the memory of his own father's death, surrounded by people who'd already started mourning. Maybe it was the guilt over his own daughter, who he'd pushed away with his obsession with success. Or maybe it was just exhaustion with being the person everyone expected him to be. "What's your mother's name?" he heard himself ask. Lily's eyes went wide. "Catherine. Catherine Chen. Everyone calls her Katie. And she's at which hospital?" "Mercy General. Room 417. Robert pulled out his phone and opened his calendar. His assistant had packed it full, like always. Meetings and calls and obligations stretching out for weeks. He stared at the screen, then at Lily's hopeful face, then back at the screen. "I can't make any promises," he said finally, "but I'll try to visit your mother this week." Lily's face exploded into the biggest smile Robert had ever seen. She jumped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, hugging him with all the strength her small body could manage. "Thank you," she whispered into his expensive coat. "Thank you so much, Mr. Harrison. You don't know what this means." But as Robert awkwardly patted the girl's shoulder, feeling her thin frame shaking with relief and joy, he realized something that surprised him. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand what it meant after all. Robert didn't visit the hospital that week. He told himself he was too busy, which was technically true. There was always another meeting, another deal, another crisis that demanded his immediate attention. But the truth was simpler and more uncomfortable. He was afraid. It had been 3 days since his encounter with Lily at the Christmas market, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. The photograph of the mother and daughter kept appearing in his mind at odd moments during conference calls while reviewing contracts, even in his dreams. He'd catch himself staring out his penthouse window at the city below, wondering which building held Mercy General Hospital, wondering if Catherine Chen was looking out a window too, waiting for a visit that might never come. On the 4th day, his assistant knocked on his office door. Helen had worked for him for 15 years, and she was one of the few people who wasn't afraid to speak her mind around him. "You've been distracted all week," she said, setting a cup of coffee on his desk. "Want to talk about it?" "Nothing to talk about," Robert replied, not looking up from his computer screen. "Just tired." "Right," Helen said, unconvinced. "Because you're usually so energetic and cheerful." Despite himself, Robert smiled. "Was there something you needed, Helen?" She sat down in the chair across from him, which meant she wasn't leaving until she'd said her piece. "I reorganized your schedule like you asked. Moved the Patterson meeting to next week, cleared your Thursday afternoon, which is strange because you never clear your schedule. You once took a video call from a hospital bed after your appendix surgery." Robert finally looked up. "Your point?" "My point is that you cleared Thursday afternoon 3 days ago, but you haven't told me why. And you keep looking at your phone like you're expecting a call from someone. So either you're having a midlife crisis or something happened that you're not telling me about." Robert leaned back in his chair. Helen knew him too well. "I met someone. A child, actually. She asked me to do something and I said I'd try." "What kind of something?" "Visit her mother in the hospital." Helen's eyebrows rose. "That's unexpected." "Who are these people?" "Nobody important," Robert said, then immediately felt guilty for saying it. "I mean, nobody I know. The girl just approached me at the Christmas market. Her mother is very sick and she thought a visit might help somehow." "And you said yes?" "I said I'd try. I didn't promise anything." Helen studied him for a long moment. "You cleared your Thursday afternoon. You were planning to go. So what stopped you?" Robert stood up and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. From 50 floors up, people looked like ants, cars like toys. It was easy to forget they were all real, all living their own complicated lives. What if I make it worse? What if I show up and say the wrong thing? I'm not good at this kind of thing, Helen. I don't do emotional support or bedside visits. I write checks and attend fundraisers and give speeches. That's how I help people. "Maybe this woman doesn't need a check," Helen said quietly. "Maybe she just needs someone to see her as more than a sick person in a hospital bed. But I don't even know her." "Sometimes that's exactly what makes it meaningful," Helen replied. "No pity, no history, no expectations. Just one human being acknowledging another." Robert turned to face her. "When did you become a philosopher?" "Around the same time you became afraid of a sick woman and her daughter." Helen stood up and walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, the fact that you're scared probably means it matters. You don't get nervous about things that don't matter." After she left, Robert sat at his desk for another hour, staring at nothing. Finally, he picked up his phone and called his driver. "Michael, I need you to take me to Mercy General Hospital." "Of course, sir. When?" Robert looked at his watch. It was 2 in the afternoon. If he was going to do this, he needed to do it before he lost his nerve. Now, right now. The drive to the hospital took 20 minutes through downtown traffic. Robert spent the entire time rehearsing what he might say, then discarding every option as inadequate or insincere. "How did you greet a dying woman? What did you say to make her feel better about surgery that might kill her?" Mercy General was older than the gleaming medical centers that had sprung up in the suburbs. The building had character but also showed its age, with cracked paint in places and floors that had been patched more times than replaced. Robert walked through the main entrance, past the information desk, and found the elevators. Room 417 was in the cardiac wing. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and something else, something sadder that Robert couldn't quite name. He passed nurses pushing medication carts, families huddled in waiting areas, patients shuffling slowly with IV poles beside them. When he reached room 417, the door was partially open. He could hear voices inside, a man's deep rumble and a woman's lighter response. Robert stood in the hallway, his hand raised to knock, and froze. What was he doing here? This was insane. He should leave, send flowers and a generous check with a polite note. That would be more helpful than anything he could do in person. But before he could talk himself into leaving, someone spoke behind him. "Mr. Harrison?" Robert turned to find Lily standing there, her eyes wide with surprise and joy. She was wearing the same thin jacket from the market, and she held a small backpack covered in colorful patches. "You came," she whispered, like she couldn't quite believe it. "You actually came." "I said I'd try," Robert replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "I don't know if this is a good time, though. It sounds like your mother has visitors." "That's just my dad," Lily said. "He takes his lunch break here every day so he can eat with Mom." She grabbed Robert's hand with both of hers. "Come on, I'll introduce you." Before Robert could protest, Lily pushed open the door and pulled him inside. The hospital room was small and crowded with medical equipment. Monitors beeped softly, displaying numbers and graphs that Robert didn't understand. In the center of it all was the bed, and in the bed was Catherine Chen. She looked different from the photograph. Thinner, paler, with dark circles under her eyes and an oxygen tube running beneath her nose. But when she turned her head and saw Lily, her entire face lit up with the same joy from the picture. And Robert understood that illness might have weakened her body, but it hadn't touched who she was inside. "Baby, you're early," Catherine said, her voice soft but warm. Then her eyes shifted to Robert, and recognition flickered across her face. "Oh." A man stood up from the chair beside the bed. He was probably Robert's age, with work-worn hands and tired eyes. He looked confused and slightly defensive, placing himself protectively between Robert and his wife. "Katie, who is this?" the man asked. Lily bounced on her toes, unable to contain her excitement. "Dad, Mom, this is Mr. Harrison, the man from TV, the one I've been looking for." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. She tried to sit up straighter in bed, but the effort clearly cost her. "Mr. Harrison, I never thought—" "Lily, you actually found him?" "I told you I would," Lily said proudly. Robert felt like he was intruding on something private. The man, Lily's father, still looked suspicious. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand what's happening here." "I'm Robert Harrison," Robert said, stepping forward and offering his hand. "Your daughter approached me a few days ago and asked if I would visit your wife. I apologize for not calling ahead. This is probably very strange for you." The man shook his hand cautiously. "Daniel Chen, Lily's father." He looked at his daughter. "Lily, what did you do?" "I asked Mr. Harrison to come hug Mom," Lily explained simply. "Like in my letter, remember?" Daniel's face went through several emotions at once: confusion, embarrassment, anger, and finally resignation. "Lily, honey, you can't just ask strangers to visit your mother in the hospital. That's not appropriate." "But he's not a stranger," Lily insisted. "He's the man who reminded Mom of Grandpa, the one who made her want to fight." Catherine had been quiet, watching this exchange with tears streaming down her face. Now she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel, it's okay. I knew she was going to try to find him. I didn't think she would succeed, but I'm glad she did." "Katie, you don't have to do this," Daniel said gently. "You don't owe anyone anything." "I know," Catherine said. She looked at Robert, really looked at him, and he felt like she was seeing past everything he used to protect himself. "Mr. Harrison, my daughter has an enormous heart and sometimes impossible ideas. I'm sorry she bothered you. You've already done more than enough by coming here." Robert surprised himself with his response. "She didn't bother me. And I'm sorry it took me so long to visit. I've been making excuses all week." "What kind of excuses?" Catherine asked, and there was something in her tone, a hint of the strength Lily had described, that made Robert answer honestly. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid I'd say the wrong thing or make things worse. I'm not good at this. I'm good at business, at making money, at building things. But this," he gestured at the hospital room, "this kind of human connection, I've spent most of my life avoiding it." Catherine smiled, and despite her illness, it was a beautiful smile. "Then coming here took real courage. Thank you." Daniel had relaxed slightly, though he still watched Robert carefully. Lily had climbed onto her mother's bed, careful to avoid the various tubes and wires, and was holding her mother's hand. Robert stood there, feeling awkward and out of place in his expensive suit. "Your daughter told me that you're facing surgery soon, and that you've been struggling with fear." "That's one way to put it," Catherine said with a weak laugh. "The surgery is scheduled for January 3rd. The doctors say there's a 70% chance of success, which sounds good until you realize it means a 30% chance of dying on the operating table." "Mom," Lily said softly, squeezing her hand. "It's okay, baby," Catherine reassured her. "We can talk about it." She looked back at Robert. "The worst part isn't the fear of dying. It's the fear of giving up before I even try. Every day in this hospital, I feel a little more like a patient and a little less like myself. People look at me with such sadness, such pity. Sometimes I catch myself thinking maybe it would be easier to just let go." Robert's throat felt tight. He understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. The exhaustion of fighting, the temptation to surrender. "But you haven't let go," Not yet, Catherine said. Some days I hold on for Daniel, some days for Lily. And some days, on the really hard days, I hold on because of a random interview I saw on TV. Lily told me about that, Robert said. Did she tell you why it mattered? Catherine asked. Robert shook his head. Catherine looked at her daughter, then at her husband, and finally back at Robert. Because you looked at the camera and said that impossible just means nobody's figured it out yet. And for the first time since my diagnosis, I thought, maybe surviving isn't impossible. Maybe it just means I haven't figured out how yet. In that moment, standing in that small hospital room with its beeping machines and its smell of antiseptic, Robert finally understood why he'd come. Not because Lily had asked him to, not because he felt guilty or obligated, but because sometimes the most powerful thing one person can do for another is simply to show up and bear witness to their fight. Mrs. Chen, he said quietly, would it be all right if I gave you that hug now? Catherine nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Daniel stepped back, giving them space, though his protective instinct was still visible in his tense shoulders. Lily climbed down from the bed carefully, her eyes shining with hope. Robert approached the hospital bed slowly, suddenly aware of how tall he was, how healthy he looked compared to this fragile woman surrounded by machines. He'd hugged people before, of course. Polite embraces at business functions, quick side hugs with colleagues, the stiff formal kind that meant nothing. But this was different. This mattered. He leaned down carefully, mindful of the IV line in Catherine's arm, the oxygen tube, the monitors attached to her chest. For a moment they were both awkward, uncertain of how to do this. Then Catherine lifted her thin arms and wrapped them around his shoulders, and Robert gently embraced her. It wasn't a long hug. Maybe 30 seconds, perhaps a bit more. But in that brief contact, something extraordinary happened. Robert felt Catherine's body shaking with sobs, felt her holding on to him not like he was a stranger, but like he was an anchor in a storm. And he realized she wasn't the only one shaking. His own hands trembled as he held this woman he'd never met before. This person fighting a battle he couldn't begin to understand. When they separated, Catherine's face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. Really smiling, not the brave face she'd been wearing for her family. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what that meant." Robert had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. "I think I'm starting to understand." He straightened up, feeling oddly shaken. Daniel was watching him with a different expression now. Less suspicious, more curious. Lily had both hands pressed to her mouth, trying to contain her joy. "Mr. Harrison," Daniel said quietly, "would you like to sit down? You look like you could use a moment." Robert nodded gratefully and took the chair Daniel offered. He felt exhausted, like he'd just run a marathon instead of simply hugging someone. Catherine was wiping her eyes with a tissue, and Lily had climbed back onto the bed to snuggle against her mother's side. "I don't know what I expected," Robert admitted. "But it wasn't this. What did you expect?" Catherine asked. "Honestly, I thought I'd feel uncomfortable. Out of place, like I was intruding on something private." He paused, trying to find the right words. "Instead, I feel like I've been given something valuable. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Catherine said softly. "That's what real connection does. It gives back more than it takes." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The only sounds the beeping of monitors and the muffled hospital noises from the hallway. Then Daniel spoke up. "Lily's been talking about you nonstop since she met you at the market," he said. "She told us about the interview, about how you built your business, about never accepting failure. I have to admit, I was skeptical. Successful people don't usually have time for ordinary folks like us." "I'm learning that might be part of my problem," Robert replied. "I've had plenty of time. I just chose to fill it with things that don't matter as much as I thought they did." Catherine studied him with those perceptive eyes. "Lily said you looked tired when she met you, sad even though you were trying to hide it." "Kids see things adults miss," Robert said. She was right. "I am tired." "Tired of what?" Catherine asked gently. Robert hadn't planned to have this conversation. He'd come here to give Catherine something, not to unburden himself. But sitting in that hospital room with this dying woman and her family, he found himself wanting to be honest in a way he hadn't been in years. "Tired of succeeding at things that don't fulfill me," he said. "Tired of being good at making money and terrible at making connections. Tired of lying to myself that achievement is the same thing as happiness." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. Different circumstances, but I know it. After Katie got sick, I took on extra shifts overtime whenever I could get it. Told myself I was doing it for the medical bills for our family. But really, I was doing it because working was easier than sitting in this room watching my wife suffer and not being able to fix it. Daniel, Katie said softly, reaching for his hand. It's true, Daniel continued. And it took Lily to make me see it. She asked me one night why I was never home anymore. Said she needed me, said you needed me. Said money couldn't hug her when she was scared. His voice cracked. She was right. I'd been so busy trying to solve the problem that I forgot to just be present for the people I love. Robert felt like he was looking into a mirror, seeing his own mistakes reflected in this other man's confession. I have a daughter, he said quietly. Claire, she's 28 now. We haven't spoken in almost 3 years. Catherine and Daniel both looked at him with understanding, not judgment. Lily, who had been quiet, asked innocently, Why not? Because I chose work over her too many times, Robert admitted. Missed her school plays, her graduation, her wedding. I always had a reason, always had something more important to do, until one day she called and told me she was done waiting for me to have time for her. She said she'd spent her whole life competing with my business and losing, and she wasn't going to do it anymore. Did you try to fix it? Catherine asked. I sent her money, Robert said, and the words tasted bitter. Can you believe that? My daughter tells me she feels unloved, and I send her a check. Like I could buy back the years I'd missed. Lily climbed off the bed and walked over to Robert's chair. She put her small hand on his arm. It's not too late, you know. My teacher says it's never too late to say sorry. Robert looked down at this wise little girl who had somehow seen through him from the very first moment. What if she doesn't want to hear it? Then you say it anyway, Lily replied. Because saying sorry isn't about making the other person feel better. It's about admitting you were wrong, and maybe if you admit it enough, you'll start to change. Out of the mouths of children, Robert thought. He covered Lily's hand with his own. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart, Lily said matter-of-factly. Adults just don't always listen. Catherine laughed, a real laugh that filled the room with warmth. She's not wrong. Kids usually aren't. Robert stayed for another hour. They talked about ordinary things. Catherine's garden that she missed tending. Daniel's job as a mechanic. Lily's struggles with math homework. Nobody mentioned the surgery or the fear or the possibility of death. Instead, they talked like old friends, like people who'd known each other for years instead of less than an hour. At one point, a nurse came in to check Catherine's vitals. She looked surprised to see Catherine laughing and animated, more alive than she'd probably been in weeks. Well, whatever you're doing in here, keep it up, the nurse said with a smile. Your numbers look better than they have in days. When Robert finally stood to leave, promising he'd visit again, Catherine called him back. Mr. Harrison, can I tell you something? Of course. When Lily first told me she was going to find you and ask you to visit, I thought it was a sweet fantasy. I never believed you'd actually come. And I certainly never imagined you'd be so real. Real? Robert asked. Human, Catherine clarified. The man on TV looked successful and confident and untouchable. But the man who hugged me was vulnerable and honest and kind. That's the person who gave me hope. Not the millionaire, but the human being underneath. Robert felt his eyes burning. I think you've given me hope too, Mrs. Chen. You and your impossible daughter. Katie, she corrected. If you're going to visit again, you should call me Katie. As Robert rode the elevator down to the lobby, he felt different, lighter somehow. Like he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment, his thumb hovering over his contacts list. Then he found the number he hadn't called in 3 years and pressed dial. It rang 4 times. He almost hung up. Then a woman's voice answered, cautious and surprised. Dad? Claire, Robert said, his voice shaking. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I know I don't deserve your time. But I need to tell you something. And I need to say it whether you're ready to hear it or not. There was silence on the other end. He could hear his daughter breathing, waiting. I'm sorry, Robert continued. I'm sorry for every moment I chose work over you. I'm sorry for making you feel like you had to compete for my attention. I'm sorry for thinking money could replace presence. You deserved a better father, and I failed you. I can't change the past, but I want you to know that I see it now. I see what I lost, what I threw away. And I'm sorry. More silence. Then so quietly he almost missed it. Thank you for saying that. I don't expect you to forgive me. Robert said. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But if you're ever willing to talk, to maybe try to rebuild something, I'll be here. I'll make time. Real time, not squeezed between meetings. I need to think about it, Claire said finally. This is a lot. Take all the time you need, Robert replied. I've made you wait your whole life. I can wait now. After they hung up, Robert stood in the hospital lobby for a long time, watching people come and go, families visiting loved ones, doctors rushing to emergencies, volunteers pushing carts of flowers and magazines, all these lives intersecting, all these stories unfolding. He thought about Catherine upstairs fighting for more time. He thought about Lily, who'd asked for nothing but human connection. He thought about Daniel, learning to be present instead of productive. And he thought about Claire, his daughter, who might or might not give him another chance. For the first time in years, Robert felt like he understood what success really meant. It wasn't the buildings he'd constructed or the money he'd accumulated. It was this, the messy, complicated, beautiful work of showing up for people, of being vulnerable enough to connect, of admitting when you were wrong and trying to do better. He walked out of the hospital into the cold December evening, and the city lights seemed brighter somehow. Tomorrow he had decisions to make. A rec center to save, a foundation to start, a life to rebuild, one genuine connection at a time. But tonight he just felt grateful. Grateful for a little girl who saw what he needed before he knew it himself. Grateful for a dying woman who taught him about living. And grateful for one hug that changed everything. Robert visited Katie 3 more times before her surgery. Each visit, he told himself it was just to check on the family, to make sure Lily was doing okay. But the truth was simpler. He needed these visits as much as they did. The second time he came, he brought books. Katie had mentioned loving mysteries, so he'd gone to a bookstore, something he hadn't done in years, and asked the clerk for recommendations. He walked out with 6 novels and the strange satisfaction of having chosen gifts himself, instead of having Helen order something generic online. Katie's face had lit up when she saw them. You remembered, she'd said, running her fingers over the covers. Most visitors bring flowers, which is lovely, but flowers die. Books last, so do people, Robert had replied. You're going to be around to finish all of these. The third visit happened on a Saturday. Robert found Daniel and Lily already there, along with 2 other visitors, an elderly neighbor woman who'd brought homemade soup, and a young man who turned out to be Katie's brother. The room was crowded and noisy, filled with laughter and stories. Robert had felt out of place at first, the wealthy businessman among working-class people. But then Lily had pulled him into the conversation, asking him to tell everyone about his first business failure. He'd never talked about that publicly. His carefully crafted image was all about success, about the wins and the triumphs. But in that hospital room, he found himself telling the truth. About the restaurant he'd opened at 25 that had failed spectacularly. About losing everything and having to move back in with his parents. About the shame and the fear and the night he'd seriously considered giving up. What changed? Daniel had asked. My father, Robert had said. He was a mechanic, actually. Worked with his hands his whole life. He told me that failure only counts if you stop trying. He said the difference between successful people and everyone else isn't talent or luck. It's that successful people fail more because they keep trying more. Katie had smiled at that. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, Robert had agreed, surprised by the emotion in his voice. I wish I'd told him that more often when he was alive. The 4th visit was on January 2nd. The day before Katie's surgery. Robert had come alone in the evening, after regular visiting hours. He'd called ahead asking if it would be okay. Katie had said yes. He found her awake, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark except for a small lamp beside the bed. She looked even more fragile than usual, smaller somehow, as if she was already starting to fade. Can't sleep? Robert asked quietly, taking the chair beside her bed. Too scared to sleep, Katie admitted. Afraid I'll have nightmares about tomorrow, or worse, afraid I'll sleep peacefully and then never wake up. Robert reached over and took her hand. It was something he wouldn't have done a month ago, this casual intimacy with someone he barely knew, but nothing about this friendship had been typical from the start. Do you want to talk about it? He asked. Katie was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not ready to die, Robert. I know everyone has to eventually, but I'm only 34. Lily is 7. She still needs me to braid her hair and help with homework and talk about boys someday. Daniel tries to be strong, but he can't do this alone. And I have so many things I haven't done yet. Gardens I wanted to plant. Books I wanted to read. Ordinary moments I wanted to live. Then fight for them, Robert said firmly. Fight like hell tomorrow. You're stronger than you think. How do you know? Katie asked. You've only known me a few weeks. Because I've watched you, Robert said. Even lying in this bed, even scared and sick, you light up every time your family walks in. You remember everyone's stories. You ask about other people's problems even though you're facing surgery. That's not weakness, Katie. That's incredible strength. Katie squeezed his hand. I'm glad Lily found you. I'm glad you came. So am I, Robert said, and meant it completely. They sat in silence for a while, just holding hands in the dark. Then Katie spoke again. Can I ask you something? Anything. Did you call your daughter? Claire? Robert nodded. I did, the night after I first visited you. How did it go? Awkward, painful, honest. Robert smiled slightly. She agreed to meet me for coffee. We're having lunch next week, actually. First time in 3 years. That's wonderful, Katie said softly. I don't know if we can fix what's broken, Robert admitted, but I'm going to try. You taught me that. You and Lily. You taught me that showing up matters even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Katie turned her head to look at him, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you for showing up for me. For seeing me as more than a sick person. For giving me that hug that reminded me I'm still alive, still worth fighting for. You've given me more than I gave you, Robert said. You've reminded me what matters. What's real? At 8 the next morning, Robert was in the surgical waiting room. So was Daniel, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Lily sat between them, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Katie's brother was there too, along with the elderly neighbor and several people from their church. The surgery was supposed to take 6 hours. It ended up taking 8. 8 hours of terrible coffee and anxious silence, and Lily asking every 20 minutes if her mom was okay yet. 8 hours of Robert sitting with people he'd known for less than a month, feeling more connected to them than he'd felt to his own colleagues in years. When the surgeon finally came out, everyone stood up at once. The doctor looked tired but was smiling, and Robert felt his heart start beating again. The surgery was successful, the doctor said. There were some complications, which is why it took longer, but we addressed them. Catherine's in recovery now. She'll be in ICU for a few days, but barring any unforeseen issues, she should make a full recovery. Daniel collapsed back into his chair, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with relief. Lily threw herself into her father's arms. Katie's brother let out a whoop of joy. The neighbor woman started crying and hugging everyone. Robert stood there feeling tears running down his own face, not even trying to hide them. A nurse wouldn't let them see Katie for another 2 hours. Not until she was stable in the ICU. They waited together, this makeshift family that had formed around one woman's fight for life. When they finally allowed visitors, they could only go in 2 at a time. Daniel and Lily went first, of course. When they came out 20 minutes later, both of them were smiling through tears. Lily ran to Robert and hugged him around the waist. She's awake, Lily said. She's really awake, and she knows us, and she's going to be okay. That's wonderful, Lily, Robert said, holding the little girl who had changed his life. She wants to see you, Lily added. She said to tell you she's ready for that hug now, the one that says she won. Robert walked into the ICU room, his heart pounding. Katie looked awful, pale and exhausted with more tubes and wires than before. But her eyes were open, clear and aware. When she saw him, she smiled. I did it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I fought and I won. Robert moved to her bedside carefully. You did. I'm so proud of you, Katie. Come here, she said softly. Robert leaned down and Katie lifted her arms weakly. This hug was different from the first one. That one had been about fear and hope and desperation. This one was about survival and gratitude and the pure joy of being alive. Robert held her gently, careful of her incisions and IV lines, and felt her heart beating strong and steady against his chest. Thank you, Katie whispered into his shoulder. For everything.